So even before I read today's scripture, you need to understand in this world, there are two major groups of people. There's a great divide here. One group are what we call theists. The other group are called atheists. So if you don't understand this big picture, you'll end up looking for small things which doesn't matter. There are always two groups in this world, two main groups. One that says God exists, but don't know how to prove it. The other group says there is no God, and he's got a lot of proofs. Something is wrong. And so, it all begins with whether you believe there is God or you don't believe God exists. And everything is determined, all the arguments given by atheists would be one kind. But the question is, how about you? Do you know what are arguments for why you believe there is a God? Ecclesiastes 12:1 says, remember. Remember what? Do you know what he says in Ecclesiastes 12:1? What must you remember? Your Creator. That's what God says. Remember your Creator. Never forget, for the evil days come when you'll be persuaded to believe there's no Creator. God says, remember your Creator. That's the first step. Then the second step, fear your Creator. The world says, there's no Creator. So what is the group that says, the atheist says there's no Creator? They come in different forms. The forms change. Communism says there is no God, no Creator. Evolutionists say there is no God, there's no Creator. But sometimes they say, there is God, but you know, and then he used the same language. So today, part of this would be remind you to pay attention. I want you to grasp this, otherwise, every time we talk to people who are evolutionists, we don't know how to talk. We don't have their language. So the verse that I want to talk to you about today is really about people who suppress the truth. And evolution is one of the powerful tools for suppressing the truth because it is full of lies. But you need to know where the lies are. Otherwise, when you are being challenged, you got nothing to say. Then let's look at this verse. Let's read it together once through. Okay, Romans 1:18. Underline the word that suppress the truth. Who suppress the truth? The ungodly. The ungodly are people who wants to cancel God out of the map, who doesn't believe there is a God, who is angry with God for some reason or other, who refuse to acknowledge any evidence that shows there is a God. Okay, that's what the suppression. How does the suppression take about? Well, one of the most powerful tools is sciences, which, of course, some people think is a powerful tool to suppress the knowledge of God. Let me give you some background to this. First of all, how did it begin? Well, it began in a very early stage, even in the days of the apostles. But it came to a head in the 1830s. There's a man called Charles Lyell. You need to know who this man is. Not Darwin, but Darwin's teacher called Charles Lyell. And there's something you need to know about Charles Lyell. He was a lawyer, a practicing lawyer, so he knows all the arguments behind the evidences. He knew it, just as Romans 1:18 says. But he decided to write a book called The Principles of Geology. And this is not about evolution, but this principle actually lead to the evolution theory. And there are two things you need to know about this man. First of all, he was the one who declared the words that I've got here. That his purpose was that science, in this particular case geology, must be freed from Moses. You know what this means? What do you mean by free from Moses? Because the first 5 books of the Bible are written by Moses. And the first book, Genesis, tells us where we come from, who created us. So he wanted to come up with a new angle from sciences to free everyone from thinking that you have to go back to God. In other words, can we think in terms of no God? That's where he's coming from. You see, I told you a sentence before. The philosophy of a man is determined by his morality. So if a man decides that there is no God, then all his philosophy and arguments points there is no God. Even if you show him evidence that there is God, he will throw it out. So he wants to free sciences. Of course, the science in those days, at this stage, was full of actually, why do you say that? Because all the frontier researchers, now the word frontier means nobody has done this research, they have come up with new findings. And today's sciences and your iPhones, iPads, and all your motor car all came from what are called the frontier research scientists. 99.9% of all these frontier research scientists were all believers in Jesus, believers in a creator. For those of you who are unfamiliar, Maxwell would be a big name. Cavendish Laboratories would be a big name, established by a guy called Maxwell. Maxwell is the one who put up the words in front of this laboratory that says, give glory to God. It's the Cavendish Laboratory that came out, the researchers called Crick and Watson, they came out with a DNA formula in 1957. But the most important is, because of these people, Maxwell, even paleontologists like Cuvier, all believe in Almighty God. You name it in the books of science, Boyle's law, come from Boyle's, Kelvin, every name you can call it who put science into our modern day were all believers of Jesus. God revealed it to them. But this man says, no, we must change that. And they say it's very clear we must change it not through science, but through politics. And that's the first thing. The second thing you need to know about this man, Lyell, is that he was the one who introduced what we call the dating method. How do you determine whether a fossil is 6,000 years old or 60 million years old? So this man was the one behind what we call, because he wanted to use geology, so he used what is called sedimentation. Sedimentation. It simply means the mud that comes out of rocks and they get deposited on the land. And so as the sediment is deposited layer by layer, then you get what we call sedimentary rocks. That means these are rocks formed from dust that's leached out of stones and rocks. We call it sediment. Like mud. Mud is sediment. So he is the one who says, because fossils are deposited in each layer of the earth in the sedimentary rocks. So he says that how old this creature at the bottom is determined by how many years it took for the sediments to form. So, for instance, now this logic is very important because even evolutionists doesn't know about this. His idea is, if 1 mm of mud is deposited on the ground per year, 1 mm per year. This part is very important for you to grasp with young people. If 1 mm, if, actually they say it's only 15 microns, but most of you have got no idea what a micron is. So, okay, let me just use 1 mm per year. So if he says, well, this layer up to here is, let's say, 1,000 meters or 1 km. So 1 km is 1,000 meters, right? So if every year is 1 mm, 1,000 meters is actually 1 million millimeters, correct or not? Try and follow me, all right? Don't switch off on me, all right? 1 million millimeters. So how many year old is this if it's 1 kilometer? So 1 million divided by 1 mm. I think this arithmetic everybody knows, right? The answer is 1 million years. So that's how they believe it's 15 microns. So if you can stretch the sediment layer longer, further, deeper, and if you can shrink this lesser, that's how you get billions and billions of years. This is how evolutionists try to date the time. You know, I often like to hear broadcasts by scientists, but one thing really irks me is this: when they discover a bone in Africa, then they say, billions and billions of years. Oh, billions and billions. So in my mind, how do you know it's billions and billions and not hundreds and billions? So you can talk about billions. So this idea came from this man. All right. So he taught a guy called Darwin. So for Charles Lyell, you should know these two main contributions to evolution. Then his student called Charles Darwin came up with a theory of evolution. Did he believe in his theory? I've got evidence and documents to show he did not believe in the theory of evolution. But he believes that because he's an atheist, he only accepts arguments for atheism. Did he know about Psalm 8? Sure, he knows. He used to go to church, he went to Bible school, he married a Christian woman, but he rejects God. So all his life purpose was to teach in evolution, but he was a clever man. He used Bible theological terms. So you have evolutionary creation. Have you heard of this? Evolutionary creation. If there's evolution, there's no creation. If there's creation, there's no evolution. But he put it together. And I'm afraid a lot of the people of his days did not realize he was pulling a fast one. So what was he? A lot of these discoveries were actually, a lot of his statements were done, that is 150 years ago, more than 150 years ago. But since then, new discoveries have in fact disproved what he said. In fact, people think that science proves evolution is true. But that's one big lie. So I want you to know, where's the big lie? So we know that science never never support evolution. Not a single field of science support evolution. Then how come evolution is still taught in our schools? Not creative science, creation science, but evolutionary science is taught in all schools, whether it be in China and also in Singapore. And I give some answers here. Because the thinking is the material world or the natural world. Because the first beginnings cannot be based on a natural world. Natural world cannot explain the beginnings. How did the first cell started? How did life begin? It has to be spiritual. Only the Bible gives you the answer, and because educationists feel that spiritual answers cannot be used. So today, schools continue to teach only evolutionary science. We try to fight for creation science, but of course, right now the educational system, right up to university, is controlled by evolutionary scientists. Because if you are a creation scientist who believes in creation, you'll be set. And you say, are you sure? Just two simple cases I can give you. Dr. Harnett is a frontier research in biological sciences in an Australian university, wrote 100 research papers. He was so good that the journalists came to see him to see whether they could put together this discovery and so that the world can know something about it. But the moment they found out that he was a creation science, a scientist who believes in God, they aborted it. Then, and 3 months ago, I was talking to another professor from another Australian university, and been a scientist all his life. He's a full-fledged professor, an atheist before, but the moment they discovered he believed in creation, they moved him out from his department and make him go to a little hut, do nothing, and then finally say, we'll pay you, you just resign. This conspiracy is worldwide, so that's why you have people like Richard Dawkins, Cambridge University professor. So when they all take these positions in the high positions of academia, of course, they sing with one voice, there is no God. So this is what is happening. There are a few words here that you need to have your notes with you. I want to talk about the presumptions. Now, presumptions means what they presume to be true, but there is no truth in it. So if you got your notes, I say here that the presumption that there is no intelligent source acting outside space-time universe. The presumption does not have an answer to the question, what caused the beginning? All right, if you still cannot pick that up, what I mean to say here is this. Although intelligent design was accepted by all scientists, practically all, up to 1850, when the evolutionary science came up, they reject the principle of intelligent design. So you talk to an evolutionary, you say, you know, there's so much intelligent design in every field of science. They say, I don't accept intelligent design. Dawkins say there's no intelligent design. So, but Dawkins is basing a lot of his arguments on the sciences of the medieval age. He does not take on the recent developments of sciences because he knows it will contradict him. You know, Dawkins is supposed to be the most reputable scientist in the world, but last week I talked to you about Stephen Hawking, another world-famous scientist, who said there's no God. Is it true? So one of the things I'm going to answer is, what about the beginnings? Evolutionists cannot give an answer to how life started. They give a story, but it's a story. There's no proof. Now, what are some of the arguments that you need to know about the presumptions and the theory of evolution? Now, this part you need to pay attention. If you got your notes, this is number 2B, and then I need you to pay attention to what I'm stating here. There's nothing here I state that I cannot give you documents. You want documents? I'll furnish to you. The fossil records. You know what's the fossil records? That means what they find in every area of sediments deposited. You'll see some creatures here, then maybe bigger creatures here, and then bigger, and then finally man. So they claim that with different layers of rocks, fossils in the rocks, they call this the fossil record. So, you need to know something about what's the fossil record. Evolutionist says that because there are smaller creatures here, and finally man, therefore this fossil record proves man came from the first cell, the amoeba. We evolve all the way, you know, and you see fish here, you see birds, and then mammals, and then human beings. So you saw, this is, let me show you. This picture, can you see where a chimpanzee slowly became a man, in this background? You see this in all the biology books. The problem is the creatures in between cannot be found anywhere. So that's where the lie is. Let me state that there is no evidence that species change on these fossil records. In other words, there is no evidence from this record that man came from lower creatures. The fossil records does not show. They say it shows, but it does not. I'm going to give you more details afterwards. So there's no evidence. And second, there are no missing links between what we call transition creatures. From this basic cell, you become a, let's say, a fish. So you need, and from fish you become, say, a cow. Then you need to have something to show that it's in between. Now, with this, let me read to you what Charles Darwin wrote in box 2. If you got this copy, please refer to box 2. Do we have this? Can you project this copy? Under box 2, because he wrote this more than 150 years ago, where a lot of new sciences have not, the DNA helix has not been discovered, a lot of other things have not been discovered, but he categorically stated 3 very important principles, and it's found in box 2. I don't know whether it's too small for you to read. Now, there are 3 things. The first thing she said was that this theory would be proven to be false if, number 1, if we do not find in the successive formation infinitely numerous, that means billions of examples of transitional links between the many species which now exist or have existed. In other words, like you need to find creatures that are half ape and half man. That's called a transition. So what he's saying is, if we cannot find millions and millions of these transition creatures, then this theory would be false. This evolutionary theory cannot hold water. Okay, this old English, so it's a bit chim English, but are you getting it? So he says, if you cannot find the missing links in between everyone at every level, from this creature to this and so on, you must find a lot halfway. If a fish become a buffalo, then you need to have something in between. Like top half would be a buffalo, second half would be a tail of a fish. You know, halfway transition. Up to now, you can never find a single transition, for the simple reason that every creature is designed specifically out of water or in the water. If it's a buffalo fish, then when the buffalo gives birth, should he give birth in the water or in the land, on the land? In the water, the baby cow will die. But so he cannot give birth in the water. Okay, so he should give birth, the buffalo should give birth on land. But the land, he cannot walk because he has only got two legs in front and the back is a tail of a fish. So his tail is going to get injured. Well, this kind of confusing picture is never, no designer will do it like that. If it's for fish, it's in the water. It's for a cow, it must be on land. So there are no transition. He expects to see billions and billions of transition. None has been found, not even one. Second, the sudden manner in which whole groups of species appear in the European formation. That means, if suddenly you see whole groups, instead of small creature here, bigger creatures here, but let's say in this band, whole groups means creatures that are fully formed. And there is a whole group called the Cambrian. Now, I need you to know about this Cambrian. There's something about Cambrian. The reason is, for the word Cambrian, is in this layer of sediments in England at a place called Cambria, they found that all the creatures are fully developed. Suddenly everything developed and there's nothing could be found below. Suddenly it appears. And of course, they claim this is billions and billions of years ago. Now, what is this Cambrian explosion? Because this Cambrian explosion is one of the most important discoveries that clearly proves beyond doubt that evolution never took place. So he said 150 years earlier that if you found sudden appearance of a creature in any one layer, then this theory falls apart. Okay, let me explain this part. What do you mean by the Cambrian explosion? And I'm going to show you a video clip, but because I was told you may not catch what is on, so let me explain what is the video clip about. But this part I want you to learn very well, because at least when you come away today, you understand what's the Cambrian explosion. According to, well, the evolutionists also knew about this. So they came up with an explanation that suddenly there was an explosion of creatures, and to camouflage their findings, they call one part the mammalian mammals, mammals appeared, but they call it mammalian radiation, so that we all get, wow, we get shocked. Okay, he called it radiation, R-A-D. And then he found that there are also at the same time botanical plants or botanical, or they call it the flower something. I'm going to show you later. So every one of them are all distinctive. They didn't find, let's say, grass evolving into apple trees. They could never find that. So this is a botanical aspect. This is a mammalian. Mammalian are creatures, animals that give birth to babies, not lay eggs. And there are other, every field, they find 4 major fields are fully developed and nothing to do with transition. That means there's nothing that shows that something is evolving. So the Cambrian explosion was actually a very powerful proof to show that suddenly all the animals appeared. And of course, because they tag on to what Charles Lyell gave, so they, on the layer, so they, of course, they say, billions and millions of years ago, suddenly, they call it millions. But we know it's only 5,000 years ago. That one I have to give you some facts later on. It's millions and millions is because of the sedimentation classification right now. So suddenly they found that all the creatures that were formed instantly, and none of them could explain it. But Darwin said if you found suddenly creatures all appearing at one time instead of evolving, then the theory of evolution falls apart. Okay, try and follow it, pay attention as you watch this clip. By Professor Mayer.
And in the same seam in the rock all the way around the world, whether you're looking in the Cambrian strata in China, or in the Burgess Shale in Canada, or in England, you have evidence of the sudden appearance of all the major new, what are called body plans, the new ways of arranging organs and tissues to form fundamentally new types of animals. Now, according to the Darwinian picture of the history of life, you should have this great big branching tree where one thing morphs gradually into another through small incremental variations that are produced by natural selection acting on random variations and mutations. But instead of that gradual morphing, what we see in the fossil record is a very sudden appearance of all the major forms of life, the major body plans, represented by the gold dots. The blue dots are all the missing evidence, all the things that ought to be there on Darwin's theory that aren't there, the ancestral precursors that just aren't there. So what we have is something that's very difficult. It was difficult for Darwin to explain at the time. It's very difficult to explain now, not only because the fossil record and the picture and the history of life that the fossils provide isn't consistent with Darwin's picture of the history of life, but also because of the other mystery we've already talked about. If you want to give your computer a new function, what do you have to give it? Code. You want to produce a new form of life from a pre-existing form of life, what do you have to provide for it? Code. Okay? 2 million years, 10 million years sounds like a great deal of time. But when you run the math and do the math on how difficult it is to build by chance mutations, even a single protein. Remember we ran some of those numbers in a couple lessons ago. It turns out this is just as big a problem for Darwinian evolution as it is for chemical evolution. There's not enough time, the mutation rates aren't fast enough, there's simply not enough time to search all those possible ways of arranging things to generate new proteins. So the information problem that we looked at with respect to the origin of the first life is also a problem in Darwinian or neo-Darwinian evolution. And that's a reason why I think there's evidence of design at discrete intervals further along the biological timeline. And we have this, I think, most dramatically, or very dramatically with the Cambrian, but I used to tell my students, you will know them by their euphemisms. In paleontology, There are lots of examples of geologically sudden appearances of major new groups of organisms. There's the mammalian radiation. That's the euphemism, sudden appearance. About 13 to 15 orders of new mammals come suddenly into the fossil record in the Eocene period. But before that, the big bloom, not the Big Bang, the big bloom of flowering plants in the Cretaceous. That's also a sudden appearance event. There's something called the marine Mesozoic revolution, okay? Another sudden appearance of the sea reptiles. And then the Cambrian explosion as well. So there's lots of examples of the sudden appearance of innovation in form and function in the history of life. And I think that the overall pattern is one that cannot be explained simply by the undirected mechanism of natural selection acting on random variation. So while you don't need this argument to support the case that I've been making for the existence of God, it adds additional support to see that there's other evidence of a designing intelligence acting throughout the history of life. Okay? One other little piece that adds to that picture just a bit more is this exquisite, I think these are real wonders, these miniature machines that are being discovered inside cells. This is an animation of a machine called a bacterial flagellar motor. My colleague Michael Behe has made this famous in his book Darwin's Black Box. But this motor has O-rings and bushings and a drive shaft and a U-joint and a rotor and a stator, and it's an exquisite piece of engineering. It's a true rotary engine. It rotates in some organisms at 100,000 RPM and can turn directions on a quarter of a turn. It's hardwired into something called a signal transduction circuit, which gives the organism information from the environment that helps it direct itself towards the food it needs. And this little motor resides in a little tiny bacterium, the E. coli. You've probably heard of it from some of the hamburger scandal fame. Okay, people get sick. But anyway, what I like to say is it's high tech in low life. Okay, exquisite machinery in a little tiny bacteria.
This bacterium motor was what I've shown you 2 weeks ago. Remember I told you 40 parts, but every part must go together. So he says it's so exquisite design. And where do you find this motor? At the back of a bacterium. He called it E. coli or any bacterium, which you cannot see with your naked eye. Bacterium is too small for you to see. It's so tiny is a motor. Can run up to 100,000 RPM, revolutions per minute. Now, that is an exquisite motor, and we talk about it that, God seems to take so much effort to do for even the simple bacterium, and you get a super motor. In fact, we learn from these creatures, and that's how we design our motors too. Right now, let me get back to this. Are you familiar now? They call many different names, but a sudden explosion of complete creatures, no evolution. And in fact, they found that if you got your second page, you find that, I don't know whether it's clear enough, if you see there's one called figure 9, tribolite. I wonder whether you can see this. The tribolite is one little creature, it looks more like a cockroach, but it inhabits the water. And this one, they said, is evolved slowly from smaller creatures. But what the evolutionists cannot explain is that the eyes of a tribolite is a super eye that can see sharper and further than any creature of that size. Then they had discovered another exquisite creature called, in figure 5, called Anomalocaris. It's very weird looking, right? Now, the eyes of this particular creature also is a super design. It can see in all directions, but an eye cannot evolve because an eye must have all the components complete, even your glasses. If I say my glasses evolve, First, there was a frame. Then I go about wearing my glasses without lenses. It's only a frame. Then after wearing it about 1 million years, suddenly the glasses appear. But you know, even a simple pair of glasses, it must come complete with a frame and a lens. Then I could make use of it. Well, these creatures got millions of parts, and it all has to come together. So this was the part that this man said, if the creatures appear suddenly completed without a process, then the theory of evolution fall apart. It cannot be proven. And even just these 2 points alone, which are very critical. So what do, evolutionists do? They don't have transition forms, like an ape becoming a man. So they must find a half ape, half man. Last week, 2 weeks back, I told you the design of an ape is entirely different from a man. Even the spine design, if an ape, you know, sometimes you see shows when an ape carry a big load like a motor car and then throw. If an ape carry a motor car, his spine will snap because it's too thin. A man can carry, you know, even up to 500 kg, you can still hold, you know, in this competition. Why? Because of the design of the spine. It's different. Mr. Darwin did not know that scientific discovery, as they come along, would disprove his theory. And he stated all this. There must be small increments. There must be half man, half ape, half man. And they couldn't find it. So what do? They invent. To this day, they have got 6 half man, half ape examples. They call it Nebraska man. It's based on what? One little tooth found in a place called Nebraska. And when they didn't even know that this tooth belongs to a pig. And from one single tooth, they come up with this half man, half ape, called the Nebraska man. 2 weeks ago, I told you about the Piltdown man. Indeed, it was half ape and half man, but it is screwed in by a mechanic, you know. They shaved the jaw, the ape, they manufactured it. So Piltdown man was manufactured. And so are the others. They got 4 others. But every one of them is an invention. But there's one they call a Neanderthal man. But since then I've discovered that is a fully man. But smaller in size they've discovered because of disease. But Neanderthal is a real man, not half ape, half man. So there's not a single example. But I also gave you 2 weeks ago a guy called Haeckel. Haeckel's embryos. It's still found in our biology books. That was one big lie. He invented all these drawings. In real life, it is not like that. He faked it because he could not get the evidence. And he could not get the evidence because he started with this theory. He's an atheist. He really rejects Creator. Now, you must understand, atheists have to reject everything to do with God. And Romans 1 says, these people find God worthless. The thought about God is, the concept of God is worthless to them. So says Romans 1. And even any thought about God is not worthy to consider. So if you talk to some of them, they say, don't talk to me about God. God doesn't exist. Don't waste my time. Of course, in this case, never waste his time. But evolutionists have a concept already fixed. You must prove that he is right. If not, he'll reject it. Okay, let me give you another example. It's not in the notes. In the last 10 years, a particular researcher specializes in dinosaur research, paleontology. That means paleontology is the science of study of fossil bones and so on. Mary Schweitzer, a great researcher on this field. And in the last 10 years, every year she has discovered new T-Rex and other dinosaur bones. But in this last 10 years, the thing that puzzled her was that these bones still got blood on it, still got tissue on it, some meat on it, collagen on it. So, although she was an evolutionist, she cannot figure out how come these bones, this blood can last for 600 million years. How can it be? She said she tried to put some blood into a test tube and expose to air. In 2 weeks, she cannot find any blood left because bacteria would have chewed it up and it has changed in 2 weeks. But now, in her mind, it must be millions and millions of years. But yet, you got blood on these bones. So, she gradually concluded that maybe these creatures didn't die millions of years ago. And biblical records would be 5,000 years, or 4,005. That's the period of the flood. It's only 4,005. Okay. So she wrote to the editor of this prestigious scientific magazine trying to put forth her theory that the T-Rex bones are probably thousands of years and not millions and millions. So the editor threw it out and said, no, this cannot be true. But she said, all my evidences, 10 years, all the evidences show it this way. She said, no, it's not true. I don't accept it. So she asked this editor the question, what must I do to prove to you that it's not millions of years? What evidence must I come up? And the editor said, none. In other words, my mind is made up. Whatever proof is no use, I reject. It's just like talking to Mr. Dawkins. He says, proof of intelligent design. All other scientists agree there's intelligent design. He says, no. So in this article, I put, what else proof? What are the key sciences that show creation and not evolution? So if you see in my notes, you've got 3 words that I need to explain, and then I hope I can get some info across. According to my notes, we know there are 3 fields of that shows there is God. There's cosmology. Try and learn these words. And there's biology. But of course, there are others. Maybe I start with cosmology. Cosmology is a science on the study of the stars. And one of the pioneer scientists was called Kepler. You see his name in science books, Kepler, as the greatest in the study of the stars. Kepler was a brilliant scholar. He in his research, he came up with, could identify, he looked at the stars and he was amazed. And he had to do calculation on the speed that stars travel and so on. And mathematically, he came up with this formula. Kepler discovered that if you have the sun here, and that the orbit is not round, it is elliptical. Elliptical means it is smaller on this side and bigger on this side. That's called an ellipse. Okay, you got it? Right. Kepler discovered that the orbit of all the stars follow an orbit that is elliptical, not round. So he wanted to know if you have an even speed, then it'll have to travel a long way, and actually it is more like here. The sun is here. So it has to travel in a path that this is nearer to the sun. This is further from the sun. So he discovered that the speed when the sun, when the planet moves around the sun at this end, he found that it moves faster. And then he found that the speed when it's moving away from the sun, it was slower. Then he came up with so if this is the distance, it's called r. Okay. This is r1. This radius is r2. He was the one who mathematically discovered that r1 divided by r2 equals T1 to T2 equals a constant. Now, in engineering and astronomy, you need to know what's a constant, because a constant will help you to calculate. If nothing is a constant, you cannot calculate speed. He found that the speed here is faster than here. And then there's the time taken to travel this arc and this arc is quite same distance, but this is faster, this slower. So he was so amazed by it, and he said, who is controlling this speed? Year after year. He said, it must be God, because every planet travels around a sun, has to follow their orbit and follow a certain speed. Otherwise, you cannot get exactly, for planet Earth, 365.1 days per year to go around the sun. It's controlled very tightly. Even the speed varies, but it's controlled. So Kepler was very clear that it's the hand of God. Now, cosmology is this kind of thing. You know, gravitational forces, interaction between planets, orbital path, when the Earth have to tilt for the 23.5 degrees. That's why when you go to a bookshop to buy a globe, you find that it is angled one side, right? The Word of God says, God hangs all these planets upon nothing. Of course, one mayor was telling us about one day he was giving a talk like this and said, God hanged the earth upon nothing. And one lady from India said, Mr. Mayor, you're wrong. It's not upon nothing. So Mr. Mayor thought she knew something he didn't know. So where is it hanging? Oh, it's not hanging. It is resting on the back of a tortoise. So to humor her, Dr. Mayor asked, so where is the tortoise resting his legs on? She said, I know you're going to ask this question. Well, the answer is this. The legs of the first tortoise is resting on the body of the second tortoise. So what about the next one? Oh, you calculate very easy. Third, fourth, fifth, sixth. And then go all the way down. So then finally where it rests, well, that's your problem, not my problem. You ask me where the earth rests on, so I see it's a tortoise. Now, so cosmology in every area, when they've discovered the Hubble telescope, you know, Mr. Hubble invented this radio telescope that peered far into the universe, and he discovered that every star that's shining actually is a galaxy with billions of stars. So every time you now go to the seaside at night, I know you young guys, you park tall, you go to the seaside, right? But please look up the skies and say, look at the stars. You know, if the stars are spaced just like the lights here, it's not very interesting. But it's all spread out. And every star there, Hubble discovered it was actually a galaxy of moving planets. And billions of galaxies all follow a set path called an orbit. So we say cosmology clearly shows intelligent design. If it doesn't, we are in trouble. Jupiter might come too close and then squeeze us, and that's the end of the world. So it's all control. All right, that's cosmology. The other field of biology would be the beginning of life. How did life go into this bacteria? There's something earlier than a bacteria called the amoeba. How did life get into it? So every field of biology we know shows God because it has got intelligent design. Most of us don't even know how many things in your body are exquisite designs. To this day, I'm told, doctors don't know how many pumps there are in the body system. Do you know our fluid need to be transferred here and there? Otherwise it accumulates. When it accumulates on the leg, for instance, you're in trouble. Or fluid accumulates in the lungs, you're in trouble. So you need pumps to pump water, the liquids. So there are hundreds of them in this body to balance. So we know that every part of the human body is a miracle. Even the brain. Some of you say, I'm not very brainy. You are wrong. You are very brainy. God designed it. So that's in the field of biology. We are not even talking about botany. Have you ever seen one tree, let's say a chiku tree become an apple tree? It never happens. So even biology as well as botany, you never see any change of species. So in other words, but the law of physics simply means you know, I can talk to you for hours. I'm more familiar. I'm a physics person. Those of us who deal with steam boiler, water is the simplest thing, right? You call it H2O, right? Hydrogen and what? Oxygen. All of you know what's water? How many things do you know about water? Do you know most of us don't even know half? Why water behaves in a very strange way. Do you know when you reach to 4 degrees, the water density suddenly increases? You know, when you cool something, the density, well, let's say from water you make it into ice. When water turns to ice, the density is reduced. In other words, ice can float because ice is now lighter than water, correct? Because you need ice to float. So ice, when the temperature of water drops below 0, it will float up in the form of ice. But when it reaches 4 degrees, the density of water is the highest. Most dense at 4 degrees. I think most of you know this. They call it, scientists don't understand it, so they call it anomalous behavior. But as you heat the temperature up to 100 degrees, what do you get? Of course, you get steam, right? Steam is again lighter than water and lighter than air. But if you pressurize into a container, we call it like a boiler, and begin to keep on heating this to higher and higher temperature beyond 200, 400, 600, you'll find that the behavior changes. And because of its special characteristic, we can use it to generate electricity. it behaves in a very strange way. You think you know all about water. Actually, most of us here don't know. That when you heat it up at a certain temperature, it does certain things. Just water alone. That's why you need a lot of it. So, from physics, every field of physics shows there's a creator, because it's a law. Have you heard of this guy called Boyle's law? Mr. Boyle was a devoted Christian. He came up with this relationship between volume, temperature, and pressure of a substance. Okay, if this is a little bit beyond you, never mind. The important thing is that these three fields clearly, every area demonstrates intelligent design.